Y'all don't even know what you're in for right now.
It's coming. It's coming. Hey, y'all. Welcome to Cross Politic on YouTube. Good to be with you. Make sure you download the app so you can catch the show later tonight. We actually talk about the federal government wanting to use federal lands to put abortion mills on federal lands in red states.
Yes.
It's crazy. It's crazy. We also get in it with Nate, but we're actually going to bring a little Nate here too.
Yeah, why not?
So, you know, why not? So, let me introduce Nate to the audience real quick.
Should.
You know, of course, you got Campus Preacher
sitting
in the house. Keith, Chalk Knox, I'm the Water Boy. Good to be with you guys. And this is Nate Fisher. Nate Fisher, he's a General Sensei partner and chairman of New Founding. He founded American Forum, which he leads as CEO and serves as chairman of Principal Investments. Nate has a broad investment and company building experience. I can't even read his bio. It's so complicated. With a particular focus on macro changes and risks. He has made control or lead investments in manufacturing, career prep, and alternative investment companies. He previously co-founded InvestRes, a billion-dollar real estate company. Has helped launch several civic organizations and is a Claremont Institute Lincoln Fellow. And I still don't understand why I'm not. He lives in Dallas with his wife and 4 children. Thanks for joining us on YouTube, Nate.
Thank you.
So
and a Harvard grad. I just want to throw that out
there.
Harvard Law, not just any
Harvard Law. Yeah, that's right.
Harvard
right?
Law.
I've recovered.
But it's really interesting because
part of the Ivory Tower.
No, no. Well, it's okay if he is.
Mighty Whitey.
I don't know what you mean by that.
You explained it to me. You had to explain that to me earlier.
No,
I was a totally different thing. That's a totally different man.
Oh, see,
totally
now.
different.
Okay,
Come
now
on,
I gotta
Knox.
explain. Thank you.
I just find something I like and I just use it for everything.
And you didn't even get it
It's
right.
like a hammer. I'm just like, yeah.
But which is really interesting. I was watching you. Gabe asked you kind of your background, where you come from, and he asked you again, and it was the second time that you talked about the fact that you came from Harvard Law School, right? That you graduated from Harvard Law, right?
Yes.
And it was like, this man didn't even bring that out as his first thing, which I thought was quite humble of you.
Not the highlight of my life.
Well, one thing is,
Don't let me go to Harvard
Although I
Law.
met my wife there, so I can't.
I worked in New York for a little bit, and everybody who I met who went to an Ivy League school, it was funny. They'd always just name the town they're from. I went to school in New Hampshire. Oh, it was in Boston. So it was you never identified the actual school until you were kind of on the end. I don't know if that's true or not, but that seemed to be the case.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, everybody would just say that.
Wow, it's that way? That's weird.
It's a weird complex about I think there's a weird status complex actually in our society where elites are afraid to be elites. They're actually and it sort of goes to wokeness, right? Wokeness is a assumption that your elite status is actually a sign of wrongdoing and is a product of systemic injustice. Whereas what we need is you need elites to recognize their elites and steward the power they've been given. Traditionally, that was what virtuous elites did. Is they don't apologize for being elite. Yeah. They recognize that with that is 100%. The obligation of using
the knowledge
that power
and everything
virtuously.
God's given you.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating because you have egalitarianism and elitism. You can't. They kind of don't go together. So you have this wokeness that wants egalitarianism, but it's actually you're going to have elites who are just better at things. You're always going to have it. My sister lived in New Zealand for a little while. I remember going over there. They had a thing called the tall poppy. And if you're successful, they chop you down. And so you get promoted, and you wouldn't call any attention to your promotion. But like when I lived in New York, if you got promoted, everybody else would buy you drinks and buy you food. You know what I mean? So you celebrate your success. So it's a fascinating phenomenon.
You remember Andy from The Office? He's always. I went to Cornell. Ever heard of it? Ever heard of it? So Nate, it seems to me you're kind of creating New Founding. Newfounding.com is the website. Okay, New Founding. And you're doing a number of things there. You got the media play, you kind of got the software development play, but on what intrigues me kind of about what you're doing on the software development side of things is you're basically creating kind of a competitor to Google.
Yes. And
that's kind of, you're taking on a giant there. You know, at lunch earlier today, I talked about, how Cross Politic, we want to beat Fox News. We want to beat CNN. CNN might not be that hard, but we want to beat, the major news network. Yeah. So, that's where we want to be in 30 years. And we're going after giants with little money, little resources. You got a team of 20 guys, 25 people. How are you thinking about that play and trying to go after big giants like Google?
So I think the beauty of software is it's incredibly, when you have a better model, it is almost infinitely leverageable. And I look at Google and I look at Facebook and I think they're just not that good. They are powerful. They're certainly powerful, but they're not very impressive. And I'll use the example of Facebook. So Facebook's worth about $500 billion, has about 2 billion users. So you think of that is a market value of $250 per user. That is, you think of their supposed importance in our culture, that is a tiny share of your life. That represents a tiny share of your income, of all of that. You think of that value of the membership, and that is the value that they can get from a model that sort of sole claim on your life comes from its ability to sort of addict you with a little bit of dopamine. It's a very weak tie. Contrast that with, let's say, the value in a church or a country club or one of these sort of tight networks that are very trust-based. People will value their membership in those networks. I mean, if you had to put an economic value on just the economic networking value of your relationships in your church, that could easily be $100,000, right? That could be people get jobs through it. It's sort of all sorts of things that you depend on for your life. It's exponentially orders of magnitude more than the value that these tech networks have on you. And that's because their model is actually it's built on it's built on very base things, whether it's just they're the default position, the first place you go for a search, but you don't actually trust their credential. You don't trust Google's credentialing enough to hire a babysitter off of Google. You don't hire, it really doesn't have a lot of value. You might risk $200 on a restaurant based on a Yelp recommendation. You'll never buy the restaurant. You'll never do sort of any really high significant risk based on this. It's because their models aren't very good, whereas the human networks that we're trying to essentially model our network to amplify and to capture are the sort that you see within a church or another very tight network that can produce tremendous value for its members. So I think of that, and I just think come from an angle that Silicon Valley people who really have in some sense a dim view of humanity don't appreciate and are just not focusing on. And you could produce a product that is orders of magnitude more powerful, and the beauty of software is that can scale.
So we've listened to you. So we did the show with you, and all I could think about is this was a cosmological position. The way that you are talking about viewing the world versus the way that somebody like Google or Facebook views the world. So, for instance, in your situation, if I get a recommendation for somebody in my church who I trust and who I know, who loves me and I love them, and we have some sort of relationship, as soon as they tell me something to do, I don't need to see, well, how many other people follow along. That person already has value in my life, yes. Right? And so I buy into what they say just because it's who they are, because of their integrity, right?
Yep.
And so there's a calculation that's being made about the world that we live in, about the type of world that God has made, where it views humans differently, right?
Yes.
And so how is it, kind of break down how Google views a human and the world that the human is versus how you see that we need to be viewing humans?
So I think Google almost views humans as irrelevant. They use this big data model where they're looking for how you behave, and they're optimizing for certain behaviors, your likelihood of clicking on something, but it's a very, very abstracted view of the person that's just looking at basic behaviors. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I look at the human, and I would say it's based on the relationship, or it's based on the person's credibility, right? There might be a figure you don't know. Maybe you know he's an elder in another church within a network, but you would also trust his judgment because he has status, because you know it's been made in a context where there's an element of skin in the game. So it's really understanding, I like to say it's understanding the information value of that human judgment. So Google uses lots and lots, they could analyze billions of points of data, but the actual information value of their recommendation remains pretty low. I'm capping it maybe a few $100s, right? Whereas the information value of an endorsement of a person, you might hire someone on that basis. You might invest. Silicon Valley, ironically, they have a very, very high view of humans internally, right? So within Silicon Valley, a recommendation, let's say, from someone to a venture capitalist, if I recommended you to a venture capitalist and we've worked together in a credible company, someone might invest $1 million on the basis of that, on just an idea. They recognize the nature of these. They have a very dynamic human community, actually one of the most dynamic economies in the world, because of how much they actually value the human. But ironically, when they build their products in a way that is sort of puts humans at the bottom layer, right? They actually have code on. They're trying to manage. Google is actually trying to manage you, just like Uber is sort of a good analog, right? Uber has code that in turn manages the drivers who are sort of the bottom level, just cogs doing the things that you can't get a computer to do, but the assumption is you can get a computer to do it is better. And that's just it's an inverted view of the world, and naturally it produces dumb algorithms in many cases.
And I think this is why it's so important, I think, for Christians to take over these spaces. There's nothing wrong with the technology of Uber connecting a car to someone who needs a ride, right? But when you invert the worldview to it, it can become very destructive. Like kind of what's going on with Google, it can become very destructive, and then they can end up using it as a tool and as a weapon against.
They can use it as a weapon against you. It's also just limiting. We've also seen in many ways a stagnation, a cultural stagnation, an economic stagnation, and I think it comes from an entire worldview that crosses Silicon Valley, but it's also how universities approach things. It's a very mechanistic, bureaucratic. So if you think of the credentials that really matter, they matter a lot more than a Google search result. They are the college credentials, right? Those are the endorsements. People spend their entire life trying to get the endorsement of an Ivy League institution, and yet that remains a very bureaucratic, mechanistic process. It's a much less human process than the endorsement of someone who really knows you as a human and can recognize and make an entrepreneurial bet on you. And as a result, I think we have a society that essentially boils down to a rat race of people running to fit into these boxes created by these mechanistic institutions, these mechanistic whether it's SEO for Google or doing everything to maximize your sort of SAT and extracurricular resume to get into Harvard. Same thing. And neither of them elevates the best of humans. Both of them just fit us into these boxes. So is it any surprise that produces a society of really a bunch of bug men would be the term, the online term, who are subordinating their humanity to these rules set by machines? And
is that me earlier doing that? I like it when my money jiggle. It folds. Am I basically a bug man at that point? Am I lapsing into that?
Okay, so what's the website?
So newfounding.com is the home website. That's where we point to all of this. Align, our newsletter, which is sort of the first face of what will grow into the search engine, is joinalign.us. And that points you to early businesses. And what we're working on is going to be called the American Forum. That's a much broader network. We'll be announcing more about that throughout the fall and later this year.
You need to go over to your favorite app store, download the Fight Laugh Feast app, and watch the show, because Nate just kills it on there. And then you need to become a Fight Laugh Feast Club member, because there's even more in the backstage.
Ooh.
He just goes off like a machine gun. Last thing, short. Are we in a technocracy right now? And if so, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
So I would say what I described is that rule by mechanistic, whether they're institutions or digital technology, both are ruled by the machine. So I would say that's a technocracy, and I would say that's it's an inhuman way of life. I think you saw. I mean, think of the COVID regime where you could be forced to watch your grandmother die through plexiglass, die alone through plexiglass. Like, what? That's not a human way of life. That is an inhuman technocracy. It's not a good thing. Technology itself is very good. We are commanded to fill the earth and subdue it. It is the first thing God did is he created. And it is in our nature to create, and technology is how we apply our creative skills to amplify our powers, in many ways to alleviate the consequences of the fall. But that must be technology in service of the good that elevates or amplifies our humanity, rather than trying to come on top of us and subdue us and replace us.
So one serves the other, not the other way around. Yeah. Oh wow. Hey Nate, thanks man. That's really good.
Thank you.
If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. And then go over to the live show. It's happening right now.